Welcome to Citizen Diplomacy International. We are going to be beginning in a moment, but I want to briefly introduce myself and offer some information that I'm going to be placing in the Zoom chat. So my name is Paul Lachelier. I'm the founder and the director of Learning Life. This is the Washington, D.C. based nonprofit that runs CDI, or Citizen Diplomacy International. And I'm the chair of these quarterly meetings of CDI. I'm going to ask each of you, if you could, to introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat. I'm going to place here, hold on a second, let me just, there we go. In the Zoom chat, some instructions for you to introduce yourselves. But if you can indicate your name, your city, your country, your occupation, and why you are involved in, or how you're involved in citizen diplomacy, you can feel free to cut and paste a Zoom bio and to provide any kind of links to your work. I'm also going to give you a little bit of information for those of you who are new to Citizen Diplomacy International. We are the Citizen Diplomacy International, or CDI, was begun, I think, in 2018 or 2019. I'm starting to lose track. And with an eye in the long term to try to develop a citizen diplomacy sector across the world. So it's an effort to essentially organize people who are doing citizen diplomacy in various parts of the world. We have these quarterly meetings in order to bring us together to learn about both the research and the practice on citizen diplomacy. So the description here gives you the details about CDI in the Zoom chat. I'm also going to place a series of links so that you can look into more detail if you'd like. Oops, there we go. And so these links are to a variety of things, including to a page at our website, which tells you more about CDI. And if you're a teacher or a student, it's a good place to kind of learn about the ways in which you can be involved. There are also a couple of groups, one on Facebook, one on LinkedIn, that you can join to share what you're up to in citizen diplomacy. That includes publications, events, and other things. And we also have a YouTube channel with the recordings of all of our prior CDI meetings. So I encourage you to follow us there. There's a link there. And then lastly, there's a broader democracy and diplomacy learning community that you are encouraged to join to kind of be connected to kind of the growing network involved in our work on democracy and diplomacy. So I see that some of you are introducing yourselves. By all means, please do, and share any things that you would like in the Zoom chat. I should note before we get to our today's speakers that we are recording this meeting, if it's not already apparent. And I will be taking a photo of all of us, probably at a couple of points, including very soon here, to basically document our meetings. These meetings go out to a broader list of about close to 1,300 people across the world. So we share photos, we share the video recording, we share the CD bulletin and other materials from the meetings to a wider group. And that includes your Zoom chat comments. So I want to emphasize that this is during the presentations. I encourage you to write comments or questions because we will get to those in the open discussion part of this meeting. So we have two presentations, one by Nick Cull, who is going to be speaking first from the University of Southern California. And then we have, and I believe, so Jerry is here, but I don't know if His colleague has joined us yet, but she will be joining us as well. So Moji and Jerry are going to be speaking about an Afghan program in St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States. So without further ado, let me take a photo of everyone, and then we will begin. And then we will begin our presentations. So hold on a second. On three, I'll ask you if you could turn on your cameras for those of you who don't have your cameras on. If you're able to, that would be great. And on three, if you could smile. 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic. So I will take another shot because there are varying groups of people coming in and out and so on soon. But to start here, Nick Cull is a professor of public diplomacy at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and he is going to speak to us for about 15 minutes to give us some historical and kind of landscape context on diaspora diplomacy.
Thank you very much, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. And you can see my slides.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to do this. Diaspora diplomacy is one of the subjects that I talk about in my new book, Reputational Security. And my argument is that attention to diasporas can both help countries to build their reputation, but also help them to protect their reputation when they are under pressure from hostile neighbors. But today, what I want to do is present my matrix of diaspora diplomacy, which I think will give you a scope of just how important this area is. I'll talk about how diaspora diplomacy fits within the main areas of public diplomacy, and then why I think it's especially important today. And my overall theme, you won't be surprised, is that diaspora diplomacy is the way ahead for public diplomacy, for citizen diplomacy. It's with us, really, whether we like it or not. And I think we need to work with it. So for my matrix of diaspora diplomacy, well, this is what I want to do here is look at the different flows of diaspora and the way that those have figured in diplomacy. And the first one that I ran into is where a diaspora that is present in an active country is mobilized to address that country's cause. So the United States, for example, in its outreach to Italy in the 20th century, worked on multiple occasions with the Italian-American diaspora. The illustrations there show Fiorello LaGuardia, a great Italian-American, initially pilot and then local politician, who was sent to explain America to Italians during the First World War. Italians were encouraged to write to Italian Americans were encouraged to write home to their hometowns during the immediate post-war election. So the cartoon there is one of the messages associated with the this diaspora writing home campaign. In the secret of the electoral cabin, God sees what you do, so vote no for Stalin. The communists were running for election in Italy immediately after World War II. So the idea was to get Italian Americans to explain how bad communism was and to use that voice with its familiarity to people back home as a form of leverage. And then more recently, the State Department set up an international diaspora engagement alliance to make this a general part of how they operate, to work with diasporas present in the United States to help them to effectively work with their home communities, including developing investment for those communities. Second vector of diaspora diplomacy is when the diaspora of a country present overseas advocate for that country. The illustration shows missionaries from the United States who had gone to China at the end of the 19th century and were part of not just an introduction of Christianity to China, but an introduction of many American economic links, American ways of thinking, though, as the illustration shows, not necessarily American ways of dressing. So, diaspora can act as a kind of ambassadorial auxiliary. But sometimes it works the other way. And one of the fascinating things about the US relationship with China is the way in which the children of the first generation of missionaries became advocates for China, and especially for Republican China in the United States. And the clearest example of this is Henry Luce, the guy who founded Time magazine, who was very supportive of Chiang Kai-shek and then of the cause of Taiwan. So effectively, a person from an American diaspora advocating for China back in his home country. Sometimes diasporas have had an impact on American politics. One example that I've researched and I'm jolly pleased it worked well as it did was migrants from Britain who'd settled in Hollywood, having an impact on Hollywood cinema, and particularly encouraging anti-Nazi themes in Hollywood cinema at the beginning of World War II. Sometimes diasporas are audiences. During World War II, the British Council had special programming for refugees to acculturate them to British life, teach people English, to explain British political systems. Mainly these people were from Poland and Czechoslovakia. But I think what an amazing thing for a country to see asylum seekers as being a public diplomacy opportunity, and to think of themselves as having an obligation to educate and work with this particular group of refugee visitors, and to see that as a future diplomatic asset. Sometimes diasporans are actors in their own right. Think about Theodor Herzl uniting Jewish people with a vision of a homeland in the Middle East. Think about Paderewski, the great pianist, articulating Polish soft power through a diaspora base before there was even a restored Polish homeland. Diasporans have been allies for public diplomacy campaigns. It's very important that there were foreign language communities in the United States speaking out in support of the countries of occupied Europe, for example, during World War II. And sometimes diasporas have acted as drivers of public diplomacy. The most important lobby for American international broadcasting in recent years has been Cuban Americans agitating for broadcasting to Cuba through Radio and TV Marti. I was interested how there's power just in creating a diasporan consciousness. A very interesting Pakistani ambassador called Aziz Ahmed Chowdhury, who was Pakistan's ambassador to the Netherlands following 9/11, he found that by actually telling people from Pakistan in the Netherlands that they were part of a diaspora, he could encourage a community pride and a community unity, and then they could become an actor reaching out to Dutch society and explaining what their country was. That just the notion of being a diaspora made them much more effective diplomatically than when they were individuals who just happened to be living in the Netherlands. So there was power in self-awareness of being a diaspora. All the different functions of public diplomacy can be helped through contact with diasporas. Diasporans and contact with them is a way of listening to public opinion, even in places where you can't do polling. Diasporans have become great advocates, the best example probably being His Holiness Dalai Lama, and how he is advocating for from the Tibetan diaspora for his area of origin in Tibet. Diasporans are cultural diplomats, and many states have sought to activate diaspora networks of restaurateurs, for example, as a way of increasing their soft power. Diasporans are targets for exchanges from their home countries. Israel's Birthright Israel program, much imitated by other countries now, is, I think, the best one to study, the best place to study this form of diaspora outreach as a way of building influence. Diasporans figure in international broadcasting. The picture shows a man called Seven Novgorodzev, who broadcast to the Soviet Union from London during the Cold War. And because he was Russian, he knew all the Russian slang, he knew all the jokes, and he was able to bring alive the British music scene, talk to Russians in Russian about Freddie Mercury and David Bowie, and his biography is called the DJ who brought down the Soviet Union, and there's a reason it has that title. How diasporans are treated now scales to become a source of state soft power. So we can see how diasporans can be a feature through which a country is admired. So the Irish diaspora and celebrations associated with having an Irish diaspora reflect well on Ireland, but they also reflect well on the host city that can say, see what a fun city Toronto is. We have a St. Patrick's Day parade, for example. So the diaspora experience is built into the reputation, especially of cities. So being a host and a source of diasporan festivity is a source of soft power. And finally, we're seeing diasporans figure in new forms of diaspora communication, maybe because diasporans were marginalized in typical media that tended to be organized around nation state. The many influences seem to be drawn from cross-national experiences. The picture is of a Sikh Canadian influencer called Lily Singh, who for 10 years ago was probably the best known woman in the world among the teenage female population. Now she's been surpassed by Taylor Swift, but she had an amazing reach. And we're seeing diaspora and diasporan connections figure in development, where groups in one country will seek to cultivate another country, all of their country of connection. All of this is remarkably important. But to round off, we have to remember networks have a life of their own, whether or not people who want to organize something are involved, or governments are involved. In Chile, I was traveling and talking to people about where they'd studied, and people would tell me, oh, I studied in Spain with a Pinochet fellowship, or I was in Mexico with the Pinochet fellowship. And I thought that this was strange because I wasn't aware that there was such a program to send people overseas. What they were telling me, it was a joke about being a refugee from the military dictatorship. So they had, as a result, close relationships with the countries where they'd spent their exile. Images have a life of their own. We have to be really careful that a diasporan group doesn't send the wrong image. And this happened in LA when Mexican-American migrant rights demonstrators lost public support in 2006 when they were flying the Mexican flag. The following year, they did much better and were treated more sympathetically because they were flying the American flag. Nation states are no longer the only game in town. If diasporans have problems at the national level, we're seeing new alliances being formed around cities. And I think that the friendliness to a diasporan experience is one of the strengths of the city in today's world. If you look at diaspora flows, we're seeing something really remarkable. People are moving, yes, but they tend to be moving within regions. So what the flows of diaspora seem to be suggesting, and this is UN data in this chart, which is probably too small for you to see, but it suggests that the major flows are Africa to Africa, Asia to Asia, South America to North America. We're seeing the creation of regional identities based on people having moved within their part of the world, but breaking down national borders at the same time. The final thing is really a point of concern. When a diasporan looks, and we know this from multiple cases, when a person in a diaspora looks to their home, they tend to ask, well, what variety of politics will show my connection to my place of origin? And there is a tendency to go for the most extreme version of politics in your home country. And we saw this with New World diasporans supporting extremism in Northern Ireland. And Sariel Hirschhorn has done this amazing book on the way in which American diasporans migrating to Israel have been the most extreme people within the settler movement. And so this creates a kind of, I think, concern over diasporan identity, and another reason that we shouldn't neglect how people feel and relate to their countries of origin. So thanks for your attention. This is just scratching the surface of some of the arguments in reputational security, but I look forward to further discussion. Thanks for having me on today.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you for giving us some context here. I'm going to briefly introduce our next speakers. There are two of them. Jerry Schlichter, who is the founding and managing partner of Schlichter Bogard LLP, a law firm based in St. Louis, Missouri. And he's also the developer and the funder of the Afghan support program in St. Louis. And Moji Siddiqui, I apologize, Moji, if I've mispronounced your name, but she is the Director for Multicultural Affairs and Afghan Outreach at the International Institute of St. Louis. And so both of them are going to be talking with us about this Afghan support program in St. Louis, Missouri.
Well, thanks, Paul. I'll start, and welcome to all of you. It's great to hear about your organization. It seems like it's doing great work, and your comments, Nick, were quite incisive and helpful. So in St. Louis, we have had a stagnant population without a lot of growth, unlike some American cities. And when the Afghan refugees were released and escaped, many of them with grave danger, with 70,000 admitted to America, I saw that as an opportunity for us to both welcome and support Afghan refugees to whom we owe so much, but also as a community to create a win-win. A win for the refugees, but also a win for our community by building population, diversifying our population, and helping strengthen neighborhoods, which all the data say is what happens with immigrants. We had an experience, speaking of the diaspora that Nick talked about, in the 90s with Bosnians. After the Bosnian War, Bosnians settled around America as refugees, and ultimately, because of a supportive environment, affordable housing and living, 40,000 of them came to St. Louis and built their lives here, which is the largest population of Bosnians anywhere in the world outside of Bosnia. So what I decided to do is to try to create institutions from the beginning, from the very outset, so that these Afghan refugees would have a place that they could build their lives with the kind of already established institutions and funded. So I funded a program called the Afghan Support Program here, which includes a major housing fund. Housing is the biggest challenge for refugees in this country, in America. and enabled the International Institute, which is a nonprofit here, a resettlement agency, to co-sign on leases because landlords want a one-year lease, they want a credit history, and that obviously was not available. But much more than that, we set up an Afghan Chamber of Commerce to help Afghan businesses get started, an Afghan Community Center as a congregation place, an Afghan newspaper in 3 languages, English, Pashto, and Dari, Farsi, immersive coding classes for Afghans who want to take a 12-week course to become versed in coding. Business grants of $15,000, 10 of them, for small entrepreneurs, Afghan entrepreneurs to start a business, a local business. Soccer for kids indoors, and an Afghan coordinator who would run the whole program, who is Moji Siddiqui, who's on the call and is going to talk about the program in some detail. So that's the overall comprehensive program. We've been told by many organizations there's nothing like this in America. And what we're seeing is our goal. Now we're seeing secondary migration from other American cities where perhaps there isn't the critical mass of people to build their lives and have the institutions that would support them. And that is exactly our goal, to really replicate what we saw with the Bosnian community here in St. Louis with the Afghan community. So that's a background on this. We're very committed to this and passionate about it. And I'll turn it over to Moji.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your attention. My name is Moji Siddiqui. As Jerry mentioned, I am basically putting together the puzzle pieces that Jerry's vision, the Afghan Community Support Program. So essentially, the Afghan Support Program was established to emulate the Bosnian migration that took place organically in the 90s as a result of 76,000 Afghans who were brought to the United States almost overnight in 2021. Because of the population decline, the rapid population decline that St. Louis is suffering from. So Jerry, in a group of his wonderful philanthropic friends, have been working towards increasing the population in St. Louis through other efforts. And so naturally, the Afghan Support Program is a part of that bigger, wider effort. So with the Afghan Support Program, it has 2-part mission. One, to establish all of the mission of the program, which is start an Afghan community center. We've done all of these things, and those things are establish an Afghan community center, an Afghan Chamber of Commerce, an Afghan journal. We've now distributed 5 $15,000 grants, not loans, grants for Afghans who have only been in the United States for less than 2 years to start a business. There are 5 of them, which means we've got 5 new arrival Afghans who are already starting a business. And we've also distributed 10 coding class scholarships, all at $15,000 each. That's $165,000. Not a loan, for 10 Afghans to go into coding careers, 5 Afghans to start a business in St. Louis. The Substantial Housing Fund allows us to co-sign for Afghans who have no rental history. We've also distributed over 200 iPads, brand new iPads, to 200 families. We also have distributed, today I got the numbers, 300 phones already prepaid for 2 years to Afghan families. And we've got 24 weeks of soccer programming under our belt in partnership with our MLS team, St. Louis City SC. And so all these awesome things were already built into the program that Jerry envisioned. And so we're really reporting on what's been done. From the success of this program, Jerry had this awesome idea that we need to go out there into the world of America and promote the success of this program so we can create a pathway for secondary migration. Because now that we've taken such good care of the folks who have resettled through the resettlement through the state, while social media campaigning and all the news outreach has done a tremendous job just basically getting our message out there, we're now putting together the Afghan Outreach Initiative. So we've been to Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Virginia, Richmond, Maryland, DC, in the whole DMV area. Next week we'll be in Buffalo, and then we'll be in Syracuse, and then next month we're going to be in Anaheim, California, and then eventually we're going to find our way back to Virginia because there's a big population of Afghans. And then Colorado. The point of this and why those places is because they're densely populated with Afghans. Afghans tend to go to places where there's a dense population of Afghans already living there, which is great because you're around people that you're familiar with. However, those places that I named, New York, California, Colorado, Texas, Virginia, are very expensive, especially for a person who's new to a country, doesn't speak the language, doesn't really know their way around. So we're going out there and working with USCIS, USCRI, other resettlement agencies, and nonprofit organizations, mosques, and faith leaders to get up front and in front of Afghans to tell them about St. Louis. While we have this spectacular Afghan support program and all of its programs and all the incentives within the program, really the Afghan Outreach Initiative is about centering St. Louis so people can move to this wonderful city. Because compared to these other metropolitan cities around the country, St. Louis's cost of living is much more reasonable, where a person can move here, like the organic migration that took place with the Bosnians in the 90s, and actually become a homeowner. You're a lot likely to become a homeowner in St. Louis than you are in New York City, in Virginia, or California. And I'm sure a lot of us already know that this, it's just the numbers. That's just how it is. I'm sure we all know someone who has lived in New York for 30 years and lives in some small little apartment and pays a ton of money just to say that they live in New York. And to each their own, and that's the beauty of living in the United States. You could do whatever you want to, but if you come from a vulnerable community where you've been through war and you want to stabilize your life, you want to become an owner of something. And so, like Jerry always says, they need a place to settle down and have that stability, and St. Louis needs people. So
Moji, just a quick note, you have about 4 minutes. So you may want to go through your slides.
So we'll run through the slides, and I thought I had longer, but so I'm just kind of getting things out there. We'll go through the slides, but I've already thrown out a lot of this, all this information out there. This is just some visuals. Over 85% of our Afghans who are able to work are already working, some of them multiple jobs, and they're making around $16 an hour plus benefits and wages. And so if you do the math, like in Virginia, they're probably making $12 an hour, but they're paying rent for about $3,000 a month. But in St. Louis, for something equivalent to that, you're probably paying rent for $1,300, $1,500. So you're able to maybe save $100 or $500 and eventually put down on a mortgage and actually become a homeowner. Employers love our refugee community because, again, that vulnerable community is less likely to come in late to work and are more likely to stay longer, work overtime, because they're trying to stabilize their life and trying to work as much as they can. So also in St. Louis, we have so many employment options. So many. So not only are we needing more folks to come here, live here, we've got employers just ready to hire folks. Just a little clip of the Afghan support program in a community meeting that we had. it's pixelated, but it's a bunch of smiling faces, just people excited because it's new opportunity. The Afghan Community Center is designed to have the Afghan Chamber of Commerce offices there, Farsi, Pashto, English, Dari classes to start there. In 2 weeks, we're starting a sewing class for women to get them out of the house, right? Speaking of women and getting them out of the house, the grant that Jerry's put together for the entrepreneurs this round, because we've distributed 5, this round is exclusively for women, so that we can empower and encourage the women to think of themselves as owners. So the cool thing about this grant, so I work for this resettlement agency called the International Institute of St. Louis. It's a actual resettlement agency. So most of our grants are private grants, federal grants, so they're restricted. With the Afghan Support Program grant, it's an unrestricted grant, and we have a very active funder, so we can get creative. So we can say, Jerry, we need to do an all women's round this round. And he thinks that's a fabulous idea, and we go for it, and we do that. We already touched on the Afghan Journal. We've had 15 issues of the Afghan Journal, and I'd love to send you guys the link to that so you can check it out. Just a quick photo of one of the final pitch competitions of this guy here. He was the first winner. He got $15,000. Now he runs an auto repair shop. This person is his staff translating for him. This stuff is so raw and so epic. The inside details, I can talk about this all day, but just for time, I'm just going through it. This is the graduation class, the first graduating class of the coding class scholarship. The guys holding the bags, these are the graduates. So they all got to go through a coding program, and their family members and some of our staff in the background there. So soccer program. This was so amazing. We had so much fun. We got the kids. This is when they were in hotels. We gave them something to do for 2 hours, free cleats and uniforms, and overall, it was just such an amazing, amazing experience. Also, with the unrestricted grant, we have the flexibility to help put together events with the public, like host a Afghan Eid festival. We even started a dance team, an Afghan cultural dance team, and we had rehearsals. And yeah, so here you go. That's a little vision for you of what the Afghan Support Program has been able to do to change lives in the city. And there's an organization here called Focus St. Louis, and so the Afghan Support Program is receiving an award, an honorary award for what's right in the region in May, because this program really has made an impact and kind of shook St. Louis to show it, to show the country, really. There's nothing like this in the country. And I'm not just saying that because I'm working it. I mean, I'm Afghan myself, and when I came here 24 years ago, there was no such thing like this, and there's still nothing like this. As I travel, people are just blown away, like this is really happening. So, and that's just the beginning. So
Great. Thanks, Moji. This is we see your enthusiasm, and it's awesome. And Jerry, thanks for all that you've thought about and invested in to try to institutionalize what looks to be really a model of the integration of immigrants in a particular community. And so I want to. It's interesting from the comments. And Chia made an interesting point. He asked Chia, who's joining us from, I believe, United Arab Emirates, but he comes from Cameroon. He's one of our family diplomats as part of our family diplomacy initiative. But he raised an interesting point. He said, "Why are you guys focusing on the USA? There's so many diasporas across the world, and many people in those diasporas are actually suffering." And so to this, I want to not just get comments from Jerry, Moji, and Nick, but I do want to get, and we're going to talk also about this interesting notion and or point that Nick made about the fact that diasporas in some cases can actually promote extremism. So somebody asked, Begum, who's joining us from Turkey, asked for Nick to elaborate on that. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce somebody who's joining us from Washington, D.C., but is Semhar Araya. I apologize if I butchered your name. She's the CEO of the Diaspora Academy and the founder and the CEO of Diaspora African Women's Network. So she comes to this with some answer to how to wrestle with people who are fleeing, people like Chia, who have fled conflict in their own country, and how, to the extent that they can leverage the diaspora communities. Semhar? Oh, I think you've got to unmute.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me try this now. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, and apologies for coming in late. I joined in the middle of Nick's presentation, found it very interesting. I'd love to speak and hear it again in full. Essentially, there's some baseline approaches to understanding the diaspora experience that I want to offer. For the diaspora experience, it is a culmination of different migratory journeys. And I do have a presentation, but I don't want to do it too much. But essentially, I've adopted the UN International Organization of Migration's definition. And what we do at the Diaspora Academy is really apply the whole migration experience depending on your terms of departure, migration, and arrival. So the diaspora journey will include migrants of all backgrounds, first generation migrants who have left home and arrived somewhere else, descendants of immigrants, children of immigrants, second generationers, and multi-generational diasporas, descendants. What we look for, the terminology can get difficult for some because they'd rather use the term migration or migrant or refugee or asylee or what have you. But I would argue that when we use the term diaspora, we're really underscoring a consciousness and a commitment to remain connected to the ancestral homeland. And so whether you're a first generation migrant who has left home and you have memories of your home, or you are a descendant and you've done your work to understand your ancestral lineage, what you're looking for when we use the word diaspora is how you keep in touch or remain connected to your ancestral homeland. This might be culture, this might be food, this might be language. It might also be daily news, daily annual travel, cultural heritage. And in some cases, to your point about extremism, it might also be direct involvement in social, economic, and civic developments in the homeland. Now, diasporas who keep a transnational existence between two countries, they end up offering, I would argue, many innovative ways to drive generally positive outcomes, social, economic, civic. In some cases, however, you also have detractors. You have people whose intentions are disruptive. And I would argue that they are outliers, but I can go on into that. My background's in conflict and peace building and development. So when you look at the contributions of diasporas, whether they are Afghan refugees settling in St. Louis, or they are Eritrean families like mine, where I was born in the States, or they are multi-generational Irish American descendants, what you look for is how those individuals and communities keep their ties to their homeland and celebrate it or honor it or practice it from where they are. Chia's question about migrants, diasporas in other parts of the world is very important. We know that overall migration trends point to the fact that migrants their final destination goal is overwhelmingly the United States. And so when migrants are departing many of their countries, their intention is to get to the United States. However, those journeys are stopped short for multiple reasons: safety, logistics, costs, travel, and life. And so we know that migrants, 85% of Africa's migration is inside Africa. Only 15% of Africa's migration is outside of Africa. And the conversation around migration tends to be with a very heavy Western lens and a very Eurocentric and US-centric lens. So presumably this is a major bias in this ecosystem. When you go to the Middle East and you go to Asia, you see the movement of labor mobility, of migrants, of education. Migration looks different. Now, I would argue, though, Chia, as your African sister from abroad, I would say that the power and collective presence of people of the diaspora in the United States is pretty incredible. And the question is, how do we leverage and support the power of the hyphenated communities that we focus on at the Diaspora Academy, the power of hyphenated communities in building bridges, in advancing development and advancing prosperity, and helping drive greater protection and assistance to those in need. Because I think I'm not sure what country you're from, Chia, or many of you, but I think if you have relatives that live outside of your home country, chances are relatives or family, friends, or community members, they are providing support in whatever way they can, maybe financially, maybe through culture, maybe through visits. And so those are things that are done informally out of pocket. And there needs to be, I think, greater effort, and that's what we're working towards here, is how you institutionalize that. So through partnerships like Jerry's work, or through partnerships through student exchange programs, through employment offerings, you find ways to really leverage hyphenated communities and help secure or drive prosperity in other parts of the world.
Great.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah, Semhar, by all means, share if you would. All of you are encouraged to share more thoughts in the Zoom chat if you don't have the time, because we have limited time for the full conversation. We'd like to get to a lot of people. And so by all means, if you'd like to speak, you can also raise your hand electronically. But in any case, Semhar, that was really helpful. And I'd like to ask Nick if you could respond, but I also afterwards, Gary, who is joining us actually from France, but is Haitian American, I believe, if I understand correctly, and is a member of and is a board member, excuse me, of Mission of Hope Haiti. So he can speak to the Haitian diaspora, particularly at this time when Haiti is facing particular hardships and difficulties. So I'd love to hear from him. And perhaps actually have Gary go first and then Nick, because then Nick, you can kind of riff off of what both Gary and Semhar have said. And we will be coming back, Jerry and Moji. I would love to hear from you. I think your particular perspective is important in kind of giving us a really positive model, but also a way in which kind of cities, smaller cities, can leverage immigration to stimulate their economies locally. That's great, but I would love to hear more about the ways in which the Afghan program in St. Louis is implicated in a larger diaspora, the ways in which you're connected to the diaspora across the world, the Afghan diaspora across the world, and then perhaps you can speak to the Bosnians as well. So Gary, first, if you could introduce yourself and then just tell us about your experience of the Haitian diaspora.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed all the presentations this evening for me, this afternoon probably for you. Really appreciated that, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak about Haiti as well. I am a career diplomat with the U.S. Agency for International Development. I retired, so I've seen development including Eritrea, by the way, on the ground, and see how we implement development assistance where it has failed, where it has worked, where it continues to fail, where it continues to work. In the Haitian situation today, where I'm looking at a country that's a failed state, President may as well say it, it's a failed state. The gangs have taken over. The prime minister is unable to come back in the country. The U.S. planes cannot land right now because the gangs are saying until the prime minister, surrenders and so on, so they're taking charge. So you have a bunch of gangs taking charge of the country, and the entire Haitian diaspora is affected by this event. I've been in the United States since 1960s, so as first generation, but a long time, and have always wanted to work in helping Haiti, and have been posted in Haiti twice. There's a lot of similarities, but different things that happens because of the way Haitians are constructed. Remember, we are a slave population that have risen, so there are things that are divisive just within our own culture that keeps us from moving forward in a good way. So the presentation have shown there are possible ways of institutionalizing the efforts that we want to make. And I'm looking forward to learning more to help that happen, because everybody's been saying Haitians have to get together and say what they want, but we're not used to being together. There are different, all these different sectors of people have brought Haiti to where it's at. And a lot of Haitians think it's the international community. The international community is saying, and there are ways that we can bridge. Even with Gary's proposition in St. Louis there, thinking about how the Haitian diaspora is in Miami, New York, Montreal, is in France. They are all over the place, and we can do a lot together if we can find a way to structure it and have people respond to it and mobilize towards that end. I'm really looking forward to others that can share with me. If you have any questions on this, I would share, but I can go on. Because
Great. Thanks, Gary. We also happen, by the way, before Nick goes and speaks, we have two of our interns with Learning Life here who are particularly interested in kind of diasporas. Sage, who is actually from, her family is from Haiti, and Leslie, whose family is from El Salvador. I should also mention, I think Raquel is still with us, another intern who I can't see on screen right now, but there you are, whose family's from Mexico. You guys just want to make a note. You may want to kind of chime in with your own experiences and your own thoughts in this conversation. Feel free to raise your hand electronically or to post your comments to the Zoom chat. Nick.
Thanks, Paul. So first of all, I want to respond to a comment in the comments from Anna, who wanted to know why are we using the term diaspora and not transnational community. And of course, as scholars, we would say transnational community, but the diplomats themselves are creating ministries of diaspora, programs for diaspora support. It's the term that's most used in terms organizationally in conceptualizing what's going on. There's also a term digital diaspora for people of your ethnicity who are of your same transnational experience who are connecting online. So we as scholars are following the trend in the world rather than trying to impose language on it. Begum asked this really interesting question. More examples, please, of extremity within the diaspora community. Now, I think this is something that really needs to be studied systematically. And the problem is that it's in the nature of a diaspora to think of itself in its own terms. And so for Indians to think about the Indian experience, and for people from Armenia to think about an Armenian experience, and not to draw parallels. But if we attempt to draw parallels, it seems that marginalization in your new country, uncertainty over identity in your new country, seems to push people into asserting a special kind of politics towards their old country. And it's interesting, Begum's from Turkey, and I think you contrast attitudes to Turkey within the Republic of Armenia and within the Armenian American community, and you have two very different attitudes where the Republic of Armenia is interested in trade with Turkey, is interested in exchange, whereas for the Armenian diaspora, it's very much held together by the founding experience of what they call the genocide of Armenian people in 1915 and thereafter, and that experience of suffering is part of what holds them together. But emphasis on extremism, I think there's a marketplace for ideas for diasporans when they look at, well, which part of my country of origin am I going to latch onto? And latching onto somebody who is articulating the strongest form of identity. So for the strongest form of identity seems to be seems to be compatible with a certain moment in the diasporan journey. I think there actually comes a point where it's possible to move beyond the divisive politics in the country of origin. And something I really enjoy now, going to Celtic festivals in for people in the Scottish diaspora living in an Irish diaspora living in California, is that you regularly see people mixing together or right next to each other who could not do that in the place of origin. You see, for example, in Canada, people from the Orange Order and people from Catholic organizations marching together, just asserting their identity without any particular hostility connected to it. It's just about, I'm enjoying this moment. I'm thinking about things that my parents and grandparents did. It's not expressed in a hostile way, and I've seen that too at the Celtic gatherings in California, which is shows that maybe the hope for diasporans is to move beyond the hostility of the homeland and just to all become people with something in common, and to actually enjoy the fact that you actually share so much, rather than importing and perpetuating the rivalries and the suffering that communities have experienced at each other's hands from the point of origin. Is that okay, Paul? I'm sorry to be going so quickly and to be alluding to situations that are very real and have caused tremendous pain over the years. And I've tried, as I say, in the print version of the essay, I deal with it in more detail.
Thanks, Nick. What strikes me, though, is that you didn't mention the Israeli-Palestinian conflict currently happening.
No, that's deliberate, Paul.
Okay,
I don't want to
okay.
go there because it's something that you can't really, you can't speak about without somebody deciding you're a horrible person.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I hear you on that stuff.
I'd like to keep my horribleness secret.
I think there are no. I hope and think because I'm looking at everybody here and I'm thinking and hoping that there's nobody that's like a rabid activist on one side or the other. But I mentioned this in part precisely because I've had the experience. We have a LinkedIn group, and there's somebody in the LinkedIn group for the Citizen Diplomacy International that keeps trying to post information for one side, and it's very one-sided on this conflict. And so we have this problem, and perhaps others can speak to this, that diaspora communities oftentimes are trying to mobilize people for one side of a conflict or the other. And so that's it's a problem. I've unfortunately had to just delete every one of these points because it's not helpful in trying to come to some sort of reconciliation and peace building and perhaps a two-state solution there. Yeah, and
But
I'm wondering
in a way, we have to be honest and say that we've come to a particular position on this where we see cosmopolitanism as a valid destination for humanity, and other people might want to preserve their community in a pure form, and that's where they're coming from. And sometimes the experience of diaspora emphasizes that in a particular generation. The historian of diasporas, Alan Hansen, used to say that what the son strives to forget, the grandson strives to remember. So there's this sort of generational de-emphasizing, re-emphasizing, re-encountering, and that plays out in politics in some very difficult or in some potentially disruptive ways.
So we're going to come back to Jerry and Moji, but I would love to hear from Semhar. You had your hand raised on this, and then I'm going to ask Jerry and or Moji if you could respond to this, and anybody else who'd like to, by all means, raise your hand.
Yeah, I think it's very tempting, and I'll just say from the outset, it's tempting to look at a diaspora from a national, it's contemporary country situations, but I think the trends that Nick is pointing to is very important. There are some behavioral patterns, and what we think about often is conflict. The term conflict affected diasporas is a subset within diasporas, because if you were forced to leave home, or if you are unable to go back due to conflict, instability, or systemic reoccurring conflict, take your region. Israel, Palestine, Horn of Africa, Great Lakes. This is areas I work on. Haiti, where it's not an active armed conflict between nation states, but it's a low-level ongoing conflict between armed authorities in country. The reality of conflict polarizes, it causes diasporas to harden their positions and to romanticize their memories of the homeland. So the romanticization is truly a human behavior, because you're watching the demise of what you either remember, or you're watching the demise and you harden. So hyphenated communities, which I want to stress is the reality. Hyphenated communities means you have held on to both, but if you are watching one of your homelands, particularly the ancestral one, have this cycle of unrest or injustice, if you will, you will become, you will think inevitably the psychological trauma of being away from home, and the guilt and the obligation you feel in the privileged world to live in the West, or to live with resources, or to live with greater freedoms around your political and civic speech, your rights, means that you begin to see, what can I do here that I can't do back home, or that my brothers and sisters can't do back home? So that popular mobilization, that advocacy, that diplomacy, if you will, is taken up by communities, not because this, of course, we say one actor is bad, one is good, one is evil, or one is wrong, one is right. But truthfully, this is also the umbilical at work, the umbilical of the homeland, and the need to do something because you feel like you are obligated. I won't get into race and religion, but that is another key factor here, because race and religion in the West has forced communities who face xenophobia, racism, white supremacy, Islamophobia, to also have to add on additional armor and strategies and tactics. So I love learning around the European diaspora history and comparing that with diasporas of the global South, because the difference that we are seeing very stark is the reality of race, and in this case around Palestine, religion, where Palestinians aren't even all Muslim, but the Islamophobic tendencies in the West, that's another factor. So I think when I look at diasporas as diplomacy and advocacy and organizing, it is part and parcel of the human experience of what you would do for your people, no matter where you are.
Mm-hmm. To Jerry and Moji, would love to hear your thoughts from your perspective in St. Louis on this issue of extremism, but also, I mean, this tension really between trying to preserve a culture, but also integrating into a new culture. I forget what Semhar called it. It was like bifurcated,
Hyphenated
identity.
experience.
Jerry or Moji?
Yeah, I can speak first, and Moji can speak, I think, to some specific religious and gender issues that have arisen in contrast with how things are here and in the old country. But to Begum's question about refugees versus immigrants and whether we do a distinction, we are focused on refugees because they're in the most immediate need of help. While we also, in social media and in the touring that Moji has done, we want to attract immigrants as well, though they may not have the specific needs. And so the program is for those who have the immediate need, who are refugees. And one other thing, in response to somebody's question about the fact that there are so many people suffering all over the world, and what about those? At least, any city can only do so much. Any person can only do so much. But what we're doing here is I started a separate program just very recently, a Latino support program for the folks in the 4 Latin American countries who now can get asylum in this country. And there's a distinction now in the asylum program in the Biden administration between those who arrive at the border and then have been shipped to New York and Chicago and elsewhere by the governor of Texas. And those who apply for asylum in their home country in South America, who can get into this country and have an immediate work permit. So we now have in St. Louis a program for Latinos, the same purpose, very similar to the Afghan program, to try to provide them with job opportunities and jobs and housing and the whole support. We're doing all we can, but obviously there's much more that could be done. But Moj, do you want to speak to some of those issues that you've seen?
Yeah, and a lot of those issues were unforeseen, so they just we had to face them as we were doing the work. That's the work, like you said, is very positive. It's got a pure intent. The point is to support a vulnerable community while increasing the economical growth of the city and increasing the population. However, we had to deal with the Shia and Muslim community really going head to head right off the bat. As soon as we had the very first introduction of the Afghan support program, they said, oh, no, we'll take the money. No, we'll take the money. Well, the money wasn't out to be given to anybody. It was a program that we were going to help develop in order to unify the community, to build a community. And so that's something we're dealing with to this day. Have not been able, we got very creative and we continue to get creative, but unfortunately, this is something that, since we're doing the Afghan support program, we're going to talk about the Afghan community. And the Afghan community has been suffering with this tribalism, religious tribalism, the gender tribalism for centuries, for decades. So this is not something that, as much as Jerry and I are like so invested in this and see it practically for the good cause, it's hard to communicate that to people who go home and have this mindset. So it's just something that I've learned to just roll with, and we're doing the best that we can. I wish that I had like a sappy, good, story to share, but it's something that we're doing, we're working through. And the good news is the people who get it, and they have joined forces with us to help push things along, and that's where we've seen progress.
Moji, really appreciate your frankness about this. If I'm, oops, sorry, you broke up for a little bit, but really appreciate your frankness about this. If I'm understanding correctly, just to clarify, there are both tribal, as in like, is it Shia and Sunni conflicts within the Afghan community, and then religious conflicts as well?
So the Sunni Shia is the religious conflict, because one is the Shia sect and the other is the Sunni sect.
Right.
Then there's tribalism within the different tribes of where they come from historically. So like my parents, they're from two different tribes. One's Pashtun and one's Tajik. And then you have other tribes, the Hazara tribe, and there's just so many. And though we're all Afghan, everyone just like I try to explain to them that in America, everyone looks at us as immigrants and refugees. No one really sees that, and we got to stop that, and we got to leave that there. But it's gonna take a couple of decades for people to catch on to that, and the younger generation get it. The older generation, yeah.
Moji, do you find that there is and perhaps Semhar and others, Gary, if he's still with us, I think you are, I can't see, yes. If you can speak to whether or not there are generational differences in the extent to which that conflict occurs. Nick kind of alluded to this, but Nick, interestingly enough, said, that in some sense, this sense of identity, strong identity, need and desire to preserve the purity or the wholeness of a culture may lead to extremism in the second generation, right? So that the parents may be open to integration and some sort of cosmopolitanism, but then the kids may want to reconnect with that culture in a really for lack of a better term, aggressive way. And so I'm just wondering, Moji, if you could speak to generational differences and Semhar and Gary and the others.
Yeah, so I can speak for myself as in I'm second generation. So before the collapse of Kabul, before the Afghan support program, I myself was very curious about my own history. And so I did a deep dive into what is Pashtun history, because just personally, because of that, just naturally I wanted to get to know myself. So I started going down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out everything I could find out there about what does it mean to be Pashtun, how far back could I go? I even found some information that said that like our bloodline traces back to Moses, and I thought that was so cool because I could say I'm black now. And so that's just to be funny. But that was just me trying to figure out who I am, because I think that's the natural thing, is holding on to my identity helps me figure out who I am as a person as a whole. Now with the Afghan support program and being in this role and seeing the conflict, I've taken a different type of approach to this, to say that let's celebrate who we are. And instead of saying you're Pashtun and I'm Tajik and so we can't get along, instead say let's celebrate that you are Tajik and that I am Pashtun, and so that we can hold on to that, so we don't let it go. However, we can't use it as a divisive tool. Let's use it as a celebration. And there are some other community members who are, the second generation, but they don't see it the same way. So I can see, Nick, that is a legitimate, I don't know if that's a study, but I can see,
Oh, I think her connection is spotty here. Semhar, do you want to comment on this? We'd love to hear from others among you. We have about 7 minutes left. So Chia, who's actually from, as I mentioned, from Cameroon, but living in the United Arab Emirates, so is part of a diaspora, is with us. Would love to hear from you if you have some perspective on this. There's also this dimension. There are a couple of other things to mention. Clark Fletcher is joining us from St. Lucia. I don't know if you hear us, Dr. Fletcher, but she is the head of a diaspora. She's essentially a diaspora diplomat for the government of St. Lucia. And she made a comment earlier on about the exploitation of immigrants, labor exploitation of immigrant communities. And so I would love to hear from her. But there's, as I mentioned, there's also this gender component to diasporas. And so Semhar, it would be great. I'll come to you, but then others would love to hear from you if you can speak on those topics, kind of the generational differences in the degree of closeness to the, as you called it, kind of the ancestral home, but also this kind of gender dynamics in diaspora communities.
Okay.
Dr. Fletcher there, I'd love to hear from her.
She may not be paying attention right now because I don't hear her turning off. Oh, there she is. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, it's afternoon in my part of the world. Hello. And I just love your group, and I have been following you almost from inception. And this discussion today is so important. What I feel is that there's so much, and because for us, while we are individually as islands, but as a body of Caribbean people, we are quite vast. And we migrate not as I saw many definitions of diaspora given here, but not like we're not refugees for that reason. Probably persons from Haiti, because Haiti is also part of CARICOM, probably the persons from Haiti, but the majority of persons from CARICOM or from the Caribbean that migrate to the bigger countries, they go because of maybe looking for better life. They get better opportunities for making money, but that never is really the case. And they work really hard. And the conditions, whenever even I and our governments find ourselves trying to discuss with the home countries, the benefits and so on, and the problems that the diaspora is being faced while they're there, because they found themselves that they work hard, they have problems with papers and so on, we find a difficulty a serious difficulty in that these governments and countries do not recognize the contributions that the diaspora have been making in the kinds of low paid work, the kinds of jobs that they would be doing. Is because they're not secure. They from them don't have papers, they're afraid and whatnot. They give and they live in the worst conditions and they pay rent. I mean, the kinds of things that we have to be dealing with and listening to. And it is awful. And yet in this present day and age, we are seeing that diaspora are seriously marginalized and abused in the way that they're being treated and the contribution that they're making to developing those countries. I mean, it's still a painful thing. And I'm just wondering how we in citizen diplomacy as a group, what can we do that can get those big international governments to listen and try to assist in making things easier? Because what I see, especially with the United States, is they're making it even more and more difficult for migrants and diaspora. Thank you.
You know, so interesting. We're going to come to Semhar in a moment, but I think, you know, part of the answer is what Jerry and Moji are doing, right? They are creating a model of how you can actually, this kind of, as Jerry put it, this win-win situation where communities that are in desperate need of new members, new productive members, and then these really willing people who are coming from difficult circumstances, who are really willing to work hard to be integrated into a community and embraced is just, I mean, it's part of the reason why we have them speak to this, is because it really is a model of kind of the integration of immigrants in a broader landscape where immigrants are being demonized in various ways and people are afraid of immigrants. You know, it's a remarkable model. But Semhar, if you would comment.
I just want to thank Dr. Fletcher for that question, and I want to get to it. But on the gender issue, I always tell everyone on diaspora engagement, to be in the diaspora is to truly live in a feminist world, because something happens when you migrate from your homelands, in many cases where the patriarchy has defined the rules, the social constructs in a certain way. The diasporas that arrive, particularly in the West, I want to acknowledge that there's diasporas in the Middle East and in Asia who are not represented here, but in the West, we find that women and girls have access to greater education and economic opportunities at a faster rate. We also find, conversely, and I wish that I want to find research on this too, I need more research to support this, but we also find, conversely, for diasporas who come from the global South, there are systemic institutional challenges that Black and brown men and boys face in the United States and in Europe that limit their opportunities for progress. I would argue that there are also some very real psychosocial impacts on Black male immigrants that we do not hear enough about, because what has happened is the patriarchy has not only been turned upside down, but the notion of status of who you are in the community has been undone in many respects, in many different versions. I can't do a broad generalization, but I can see a trend occurring, particularly where migration trends in the US after the Refugee Act of 1980 and the immigration numbers of migrants from Africa increased sharply. It led to schisms in the household where women were finding employment and education. And in many cases, a lot of the diaspora innovation that we're seeing today are from women across communities. Asian, Latino, Arab, and African diasporas are being led by women. I have many thoughts on why, but I do think that women tend to operate, are given the tools early on to think of community-based skills. And because of the patriarchy, men are often encouraged to think of from an individual self of what they can do for themselves. And what that does in the diaspora is you find a lot of women doing community-based work and being innovative the way that Moji is doing. This isn't just a job for her, but also she has found more opportunity. Lastly, on Dr. Fletcher's question around why the US, or the way the US is treating migrants and refugees, I love the conversation, today's conversation, because it's showing what's being done at the local, state, and federal level. And I'm always inspired by cities like St. Louis. If you Google Office of New Americans, and you look at how many cities in the US have ONAs, those are really the nuts and bolts of how immigrants are being integrated, whether they're refugees, whether they're just new arrivals, whether whatever their again, terms of departure, migration, and arrival. So those first gen arrivals are being integrated. But Dr. Fletcher's point is huge, because what happens to second gens? What happens to all these school to prison pipeline kids who are kids of African immigrants, who are kids of Caribbean immigrants? That is a diaspora problem we're seeing right now, where many African communities are being faced with their children who were born and raised in the States falling into the cracks of the United States. How do you support? Again, I'm stressing race because that is what happens in the West, race and religion. But when brown and black immigrants come to this country and they have such power, such economic and social and cultural power to contribute to their homeland, but they're rendered invisible in the West, what happens to them? Their identities harden. They continue to mobilize without the fanfare and without the recognition and without the funding. But they also have a higher likelihood of being criminalized or caught into the white supremacist institutional systems that are here. So those conversations in diaspora, we don't have them in the US. That's why I'm really happy to be on this call. In Europe, when we have diaspora policy conversations like this, there's an explicit acknowledgement of the ceilings, because in Germany, you cannot get your citizenship if you were born to an immigrant. So if you are a diaspora in Germany, you know immediately that you don't have rights to citizenship. The same in Saudi Arabia. Migration in Europe and in other parts of the world is explicit in what rights you can achieve. In the US, however, there's a grayness here. And it's important for receiving communities like Jerry's International Institute. I'm from Minnesota, so I see a lot of this in Minnesota. It's important for the receiving communities to understand what these migrant communities are suddenly being faced with. A lot of invisible barriers that didn't exist in their homelands, and a lot of very real barriers, cultural, social, gender, that are highly valued and I think are important. It isn't to say that the West is better than our homelands, but these constructs are being undone, and it's like watching chemistry. It's like watching a formula put itself back together in the new homeland. It's fascinating. But I would argue, Paul, it's a lot to ask, and not indicating this about today's conversation, but it's a lot for us to assume that immigrants can communicate these issues and navigate the new world and help their homelands, right? So I focus particularly on second gens for this reason. I focus on second gens because we straddle, as a child of immigrants, I'm born in New York, we straddle a very nice fine line between understanding the culture of our homeland here and there. And second gen diaspora targeting, I think, is so key, particularly where race and religion come and where non-English speaking communities come. So the Latino communities, the Asian communities, you see children translating for their parents, running businesses, and it's not even celebrated. It's not even honored. What a child born in Washington, D.C. to El Salvadorian parents is doing for their mom and pop store.
So we need to finish up here, because we've got to briefly present our CD bulletin at the end of this, which is kind of an encapsulation of what's going on in citizen diplomacy in the world. But Chia, I think I want to give you the last word, in part because you can speak to some of what Semhar has been saying. From your vantage point, I don't know if you define yourself as a refugee from Cameroon in the United Arab Emirates, but if you can briefly talk to how you feel in the United Arab Emirates, whether you're welcome there, and your experience as a member of a diaspora.
Well, thank you, Paul. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. I thank Jerry for a great job they are doing right there over there in America, even though I was trying to say something. So here in the Terence, here in United Arab Emirates from Cameroon, because of the crisis, that's why I'm here also. And here, Paul, is hard, you know, it's very good, it's cool here, and they have a good security system. There is no problem, but just having a job sometimes is very hard, and the system also is very high, you know. It's just like everyone is tourist. It's just like everyone have money, but if you don't have that money to survive here, it's not that easy. So that's why I was like saying that if I find myself in anywhere as a diaspora, I have to be grateful. I have to be grateful, especially if I find myself in America and I don't need anyone to give me something anymore. I because there are a lot of opportunities there where if I find myself there, I know I am already okay. I need not to see into others that they are still struggling, not someone to still be catering for me when I'm in America. I have to take care of myself and take care of others who are out there also struggling to survive. So that is my point of view, and I don't have much to say as the time goes on. I thank everyone who was here, and it was good, and I loved it.
Great. So Chia, just a little background. There's conflict in his country of Cameroon between the English-speaking and the French-speaking portion of the country. His own family has been affected by this. I think, as I understand, his family's home was burned down. And so, you know, he can speak from a very in a very personal way to this experience of being part of a diaspora. So this has been a fascinating conversation. And I just want to, we're going to finish by having Brian Smith talk to us about what's happening in citizen diplomacy through this citizen diplomacy bulletin, which I'm going to share on screen with you, which we publish with every quarterly meeting of CDI, of Citizen Diplomacy International. Brian. Oops. Oh, hold on a second here. Let me get to the right page. Sorry, guys. There you go.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to everyone who spoke and shared their thoughts. This truly was a compelling conversation and really grounded in concrete action and context. And what I love about these meetings is, you know, they're just a small cross section of the world, and it's a global community, and not just as a forum to discuss citizen diplomacy, but really a place of practice and finding those connections across the world. Just very briefly, we just tried to do a roundup of the current happenings and work being done in citizen diplomacy. Starting here on the front page, a big summit happening with the great organization Sister Cities International that I'm sure many of you have heard of, but a big summit for all of North and South America, as well as they have a wonderful artist showcase that they're holding with their annual meeting. So you can find all about those big events there. And I think one thing I would there's not much time, but two things. This Civicus Monitor, which tracks the level of openness or closeness of civic spaces around the world. And I think it's important to note that things are not exactly getting better in that sphere. And I think in terms of citizen diplomacy, the most important thing is to actually have the ability to speak and to form connections with citizens and other non-state actors around the world. So that's important to keep an eye on. And at the international level, that the whole notion of civil society is very much on the table in terms of citizen groups shaping the agenda of the UN at this big summit of the future that's happening in August. And then now coming up in just a couple of months, the Civil Society Conference is taking place in Nairobi. So that's an important venue for citizen groups to have a voice. And there have been calls for more contributions from civil society, and you can read about that also there. And then Paul can maybe mention what Learning Life is doing in the near future. But we also have a list of recent publications and books, and point out this Women on the Pilgrimage to Peace. Simhar talked very much about the role of women. I think everybody is focused on women in peacemaking and conflict areas and their role in diasporas as well is clearly critical. So that's pretty much it. But please do, we want everyone to contribute to this. And if you know in your home countries or wherever you are living and working, to be on the lookout for events and publications and any materials related to citizen diplomacy. And please do. Paul, I guess you could they could email you.
Yep.
At letlearninglive@gmail, or definitely join
or
the
Paul.
Facebook community, etc.
Yep.
Oh,
And
there it is, Paul.
you
Yes,
see
Paul
here at the bottom
Learning Life.
here, you can contact me at paul@learninglife.info with any details. Semhar and others, if you are publishing on issues related to citizen diplomacy, by all means, we can share this out to a larger group through the CDI bulletin. I'll mention briefly our other program in citizen diplomacy called the Family Diplomacy Initiative is holding a series of 4 live international dialogues on security issues for families. So we're going to be talking about war, poverty, climate change, gender-based violence, and the internet. So major challenges to the security of families. These will be live international dialogues, just like this one via Zoom. I'm going to share and just remind you all in the Zoom chat that you are encouraged to join the Citizen Diplomacy Initiative on Facebook and on LinkedIn. There are links to those where you can post what you're up to in citizen diplomacy. I'm going to share this right now to the Zoom chat so you have it. You can also follow us on YouTube. This meeting and all of our meetings will be posted. In fact, I'm aiming to have this up today at our YouTube channel. These are the listed meetings coming up for CDI. So we have a meeting on international expositions that is happening on June 4th, on digital diplomacy on September 4th, and lastly on careers in citizen diplomacy on December 3rd. And indeed, Semhar, I'm going to be contacting you because I think you should be one of our speakers for the careers in citizen diplomacy in December if you're willing. So all right, everybody, really appreciated your contributions. Thanks to Nick Cole for his providing really rich context, historical context on this, to Jerry and to Moji for giving us a shining beacon, an example of a diaspora diplomacy at its best. And Gary Semhar for really helping to contribute to the conversation, as well as Dr. Clark Fletcher in St. Lucia. Thanks, everybody, and see you hopefully in June. Bye.